Alright, welcome back. So in this video, we're now going to talk about a phenomenon that I call prayer alignment, right? Which probably might be better to describe as being in alignment with your prayer. Which will make a little more sense based on what we talk about in chapter 10. Basically, we talk about the laws of manifestation or the metaphysical laws, but I put this in the book before I came up with those ideas, so I just left it in chapter 4 of book 2, and I'll go over it now. So, basically, I'll just read this off and then I'll go over it. As you can see, it's not too much to say, but it's just something that's interesting to think about. So, in some cases, a prayer cannot be answered in a single moment of inspiration or revelation. In these cases, it may require a series of actions or steps that are directed by the Holy Spirit. So, ultimately, what I'm saying there is that sometimes you may ask for something, right? Maybe you're asking to get something or have a certain experience of some kind or receive knowledge, something, right? It's not always a case that it's a single moment, right? Of let's say too big to be a coincidence phenomena, the way God answers prayers. It may not just be a single moment like that, right? Or a single moment where you feel this holy type of compulsion or this inner holy voice telling you to do something or something in your dream, right? Sometimes it's going to be a series of those, right? And you have to sort of listen to one of them, and one of them will essentially guide you to take this step. Then another one of them will guide you to take this step, and so on and so forth until you get to where you need to be. And the way I kind of approach this in the book is I go back to basics, right? So I go back to what I talked about in the beginning about how when God operates or works in your life, you have to give consent to that, right? So free will is the sort of, you basically think of it as one of the most fundamental laws of the universe, which is basically an extension of the fundamental law of manifestation, which we talk about in chapter 10. But, so I set up kind of almost like a thought experiment, right? So I forget what the German word for it is, and that's talked about a lot in physics. I can't say it. Gedenk experiment, something like that. I don't know. I've never heard someone pronounce it, but I've read it. But anyway, I set up a thought experiment about how, let's say you pray to God. So I've actually done this before. So let's say I pray to God. Before I go into that example, I want to use the one I actually talked about in the book. So let's say you pray to God and ask for a job. Right? You lost your job for whatever reason and you want God's help to find another job, right? So that's something good, right? That's a good reason. Your reason is good and pure and it is holy, right? So God's going to, as far as I know, God is going to help you with that. Or God generally would help you with that type of request because it's truly good and it's for a good cause. And let's say you hold the intention where you're giving God consent to come into your life and move and have His Spirit move in your life in a way that helps you find a job. Okay. Now let's say the next day, let's say you were looking for a whole bunch of jobs that day. You had all this zeal and all this passion to find a job. Then the next day you decide, I'd rather play video games, watch movies, right? You still need to look for a job. You haven't gotten one yet, but you're like, you know what I mean? You've actually changed your mind and you've decided you'd rather play video games then look for a job, right? So you want to play video games more than you want a job in that moment. Now, but you prayed to God earlier saying that you want a job. So this is an interesting question, right? Does His Spirit still move in your life based on what you prayed for the first day? In other words, your intention gave Him consent that first day that you prayed. But what about the second day? Your intention's clearly saying that you'd rather play video games than have a job. Does His Spirit still move in your life even though your intention's kind of expressing something differently from what it expressed the first day? And let's say you do it a third day, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, right? And you just keep doing it continuously. Does God's Spirit still move? Let's say in your heart you're kind of saying, I don't care about a job anymore. Does His Spirit still move and operate in your life to help you get that job anyway, in spite of what your intention is saying? Especially if we consider the fact that if you keep producing that intention, you're technically charging your subconscious. And remember, part of consent is expressed by your subconscious charge. So it's an interesting question, and it's one I've thought about. And I believe the answer is that God, I can't speak for God, right? He knows best, and he has his ways of working. But I suspect that in many cases, if that were to occur, God would not move in your life because you have, in a sense, you've taken consent away, even though you've given it that first day. So how do you avoid that? Well, you would avoid it by keeping your intention, your future intentions and actions in alignment with that initial prayer. So in other words, you would keep holding the intention to seek that which you have prayed for, which ultimately means that you would continue to work on getting a job in that example. So you pray to God to help you get a job, but then you also keep looking for a job anyway until you get one. Now you're constantly producing intentions that continuously give the consent that you expressed that first day. And again, these intentions are good, they're honest, they're for a truly good cause. So it has all the factors needed for God to sort of say yes to this prayer and work in your life. And so that actually reminds me of an aphorism. Right? I don't know if the aphorism is the right word, but it says that God, maybe more of an idiom, but it says that God helps those who help themselves. And you've probably heard that a million times, right? Now, an atheist will say that's some variation of confirmation bias or something, or God works in mysterious ways when you can't explain something. But no, right? That is actually the fundamental law of the universe. It works in pretty much everywhere, but it also works with God, right? It works based on this framework. I can explain it, right? It works based on this framework of intention and consent, right? So, yeah, but that's correct. So when you pray to God and you ask for something, you have to make sure that don't just sit there and expect him to do all the work. If I ask God for a job, now I can play video games because he's on it for me. No, right? That is actually a form of taking away consent. At least I believe that, right? So it's a form of taking away consent from what you truly want, right? You have to keep your intentions and your actions in alignment with what you prayed for in order for the prayer to sort of work, right? In order for it to work properly, because you're continuously giving consent to what you want in that case. And so, just to give an example of experience that happened to me, I prayed to God and asked for a church, right? So I wanted to find a church. I think I give this example in the book. I wanted to find a good church to go to. This is when I was really first coming to God. I hadn't been to church in years, right around this time. But I knew of these principles. And so I asked God to help me find a church. So I asked God to help me find a church. And I remember I was going to the local grocery market by me, so Stop and Shop. And I remember there was these missionaries outside the store, and they gave me a card one day. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Didn't think much about it. I thought maybe this was God answering my prayer because I knew of these principles at the time. And this was years ago, by the way, from the time of this recording. And so I was like, I thought about it, but I didn't really pursue it. And then I just got too busy and I just didn't do it, even though I know I prayed for it. So it's like I went back on the prayer. But then I prayed to God again and I was like, help me find a church. And I was like, this time I'm going to go through with it and see it to the end, right? So I'm going to stay in alignment with my prayer. And then I go to the same supermarket, sit back to the same Stop and Shop. I see these missionaries again, right? And so I hadn't seen them for a couple weeks. I don't remember exactly how long it was, but I think it was a couple weeks where they were there, and they were just gone a couple weeks. Then the very next Sunday, I believe it was a Sunday after I prayed, they're there again, the exact same ones, right? Well, there's different ones, but they're from the same church. They gave me a card again. So I was like, okay, so this is God wanting me to go to this church. And so I did, and it was actually a great church. Like, I love that church. You know what I mean? And it had exactly what I was really wanting in the church and what I was looking for. Now, what's interesting, though, is that there were some other issues with the church where even though it was a great church, I couldn't go forward with something else I wanted to do. And so I was like, well, before I even get into that, there was something else I was looking for. And then I remember I had this dream that I was going to be invited somewhere when I went to the church. And I was like, interesting. So I was I was kind of expecting it because that was the next step I'm supposed to take in the series of steps to get to the answer of my prayer, to what I'm looking for. And then I go there, and then they like, not me directly, but they had there was like, they have announcements in church and things like that. And so in the announcements, they were talking about kind of a get together of people. I was like, that is what I think. I think if to follow the prayer to its full sort of fruition, I'm supposed to go to that. And I just decided not to. And I think God knew that I wasn't going to, because I was just too busy, right? Well, obviously God knew. But what I mean is that I think he wanted me to see it, but I think he also agreed that I'm going to be too busy to really go into this type of stuff. But he knew that he wanted me to see it, but he knew I was going to do. He wanted me to see that I just don't have the time for this, which I really didn't. But in those days I was kind of thinking I could. And that's what I was talking about before, when I kind of want to have more fun and hang out more. But I just didn't have time for that. It would have just taken away from the stuff I needed to do. And so yeah. But going back to the other thing about the church, is there's something else later that I wanted to do but couldn't necessarily do at that church. And that sort of created another series of steps, which was kind of amazing. So there was actually more reasons that God sent me to that church even than I realized. God's prescience, right, is crazy. The ability to see into the future and sort of plan things, it's like amazing. It's so amazing when you see it, right? Because you don't deal with that every day, but once you have a relationship with God, you're going to start seeing it. Like how many steps ahead into the future he's seeing. But yeah, that's pretty much it, I think. Yeah, I just want to talk about that in this video. So when you pray to God for certain experiences, now he's going to respond probably in one of the ways that I talked about in the other video. And again, there could be different ways that he responds outside of what I said. But those are the main ways he responds that I've come to recognize. But he may respond in those ways, but in a series of those ways, right? So in other words, it creates a chain of sort of events or causes. So he may respond to you, to your prayer, by telling you to take step 1. And then when you take step 1, you'll get another message to take step 2. And just take step 3, and you'll keep getting messages. It could be could be one of those ways we said God responds to prayers, or it could be multiple of them at once, right? Different combinations of them. But you'll keep getting messages to take each step until you finally get to fruition. You basically get to the end of the prayer, or the answer to your prayer. So that can happen too. I remember there was this girl I was talking about. So this is the one I mentioned before, who was first coming to God. She actually asked for the same thing. She wanted to find a church. And God was directing her toward a particular church. And when she sort of went to the church, she found out that they didn't really speak her language. But she was saying, she didn't go at first, right? But then she just decided later to go. I think she didn't go at first, or she might have been hesitant and then went. I forget the story she told me, but it was one of the two. So she was very hesitant or just didn't go, but then she decided to go later. And sure enough, when she went to the church, it turns out they were actually looking to offer services in her language, but they wanted to make sure they had enough people. When they saw her, they're like, yeah, we really need to do this, right? That's an example of how God moves, right? So it's just amazing when you get used to it. You know what I mean? I don't know if you ever really get used to it, but it's always amazing when you see it in action. But when it ultimately comes down to is what I said before. Always trust in God, right? You will never go wrong trusting him, right? When you have faith in him and you pray to him, so what we said before, when you pray to him for a cause that is truly good, and in your heart, you want him to do it his way, and you're willing to accept it. You trust in him and you have faith that he will lead you to the best thing for you. Whereas I know he does it every single time, right? And it's amazing. And so it can be when you pray in that way and you give that consent and that permission in your heart, even if it's God, right, you might be a little nervous or unsure. Well, what's God going to sort of, because there's a temptation, which we talked about before, there's a temptation to sort of shrink the scope of the prayer, right? I want God to help me with this prayer, but only if he does it in these ways I have approved of. No, right? That's not fully having God come into your life. You're not giving him full permission to be who he is, right? You're wanting him to be more like you. You're picking and choosing which parts of him you want. Don't do that. In your heart, give him full permission to do as he wishes, right? And so you have to trust him. And when he leads you on a series of steps, right, you may be a little bit nervous sometimes to take that first step or the second step or the third step. Trust him, right? Always trust God. You can never go wrong by trusting him, right? And I know it seems a little obvious saying it, but putting into practice sometimes can be challenging, right? But again, always trust God. Like once you start to get used to it, you're going to see what I'm talking about. And you're going to see you really start to see, not only do you see like how good God truly is, you start to really recognize your own faults more, right? Because you see how God moves and you see how perfect he is, as well as Jesus and the Holy Spirit. It's like sometimes I like to think of it as like seeing the pros, right? Because when you truly want the goodness of God, right, you start making an effort. Like we said before, you're motivated by honor. You're motivated by honoring the relationship you have with Jesus. And so you start making an effort to just be a better person, even if there's no consequence that you're immediately going to get to or that you're trying to avoid. You just want to be a better person because you believe it brings you closer to Jesus and it's what he would want. And when you start praying to God in Jesus Christ and you start to see they answer your prayers in certain ways and they direct you in certain ways and give you certain dreams, things like that, it's like you start to see what real perfection looks like. You start to kind of pick, like a kid, right? You start to pick up on it and you see it and now you want to imitate it, right? It's like, I kind of think of it like God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit. They're like the pros, right? They're like the really good at being a good person, right? So they're perfect. And we'll never be perfect, like I said, but you have to, it's like you're inspired to chase it. Well, let me try to be more like them, you know? And so yeah, basically going back to this, always trust God. It's going to be amazing when you have a relationship with God and you see it more and more. You see how truly good God is and how faithful he is, right? Like I said, when God says something, you can take it to the bank. You know what I mean? But, so yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. In the next video, I forgot what's in the next video. Oh, I think in the next video I'll talk about, at least in the book, I talk about having a conversation with God. There's another topic I wanted to cover. I don't know if we'll cover in the next video or the one after. But that's not super important right now, though. But whichever one I do, thanks for watching, and I'll see you with that topic, discussing that topic in the next video.